Hello, welcome to the Energy Question with David Blackmon. I'm your host, David Blackmon, and my special guest today is Mr. Tom Pyle, who is the president of the American Energy Alliance and also leads the analytics arm of the AEA, which is the Institute for Energy Research. Tom, how are you doing today?
I'm good now that I'm here with you, David. It's been a while. Good to see you again.
It has. It's been too long. For those who don't remember, Tom was with us last, what was that, November, I guess it was.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. And it's always fun to catch up with Tom because he is, in touch with everything that's happening in Washington. In fact, Tom, just take a minute to talk about AEA and what you do there,
Yeah.
what your mission is.
So we're here. We are here for your readers or listeners and podcast viewers. We are a nonprofit. We call ourselves a kind of a consumer advocate watchdog organization. We just focus on energy policy, the implications for you, for companies, for the economy, things like that. What's great about AEA is we give you tools to participate in this process. We make you informed, and we have a program called the American Energy Scorecard. So you can type in your zip code. You can see how your elected representatives are treating these issues, whether they are creating or advocating for policies that allow us to produce more of our resources at home, allow us to have affordable and abundant, reliable energy, or the reverse. If your member is promoting policies that make it more expensive, that force us to be dependent on countries like China and things like that. And then also we have the ability to go out there and do public polling and things like that. So we're sort of a one-stop shop for all of your energy information, but also the ability to engage and impact the process yourselves. So AmericanEnergyAlliance.org, sign up for that little annoying little sign up deal, and everything else will get fed to you. So
Exactly. It's invaluable to me. I use it and reference it all the time in the things I write and talk about. So talking about making things more expensive for us, the EPA recently announced it was going to implement new auto mileage standards and emission standards for automobiles. And the obvious desire of the Biden administration is to force more and more vehicles or drivers to switch over from internal combustion cars to electric vehicles. Isn't the effort here just to essentially make it impossible to produce internal combustion cars in the United States anymore?
Yeah, well, the agenda is slightly bigger than that. The ostensible purpose is to get us in EVs.
Yeah.
But right now, today, we're driving about 6% of the fleet is electric. Okay. And I don't have the breakdown of that 6% in front of me, but I bet you that almost all of it is affluent, wealthy,
Sure,
individuals and households who live on the coasts, mostly, maybe in Austin. And it is their fourth car in some cases. It's their get out of guilt car for being a human being that produces and makes things and consumes things. It is not something that is practical yet for working class Americans, for small businesses, for folks who depend on their vehicles for their job. We bought a new house. We have run a lot of repairs. I see a whole lot of F-250s. I see a whole lot of work trucks coming and going, and you can bet that they're not electrified. And that's because the stuff that works, and that's why people purchase them. What the government is trying to do is force us to buy things that we don't want or don't need or aren't ready, right? And that's what this is. And if they were to let's put this rule in sort of in terms of numbers. 6% now of the vehicle fleet is roughly electric. They want us to be up to 67% by 2030. Okay.
7 years.
In 7 years. Now, there are all kinds of stats and statistics out there. And you mentioned the Institute for Energy Research. We're actually releasing a report this week. It's got a fancy title, but I call it Mine, Baby, Mine, right? Do you remember Drill, Baby, Drill?
Right.
Yeah, same concept. We do not produce the materials and minerals needed for for these electric vehicles. And if just the United States alone were to try to get to 67% in that 7 years, we wouldn't have enough.
Right.
There isn't enough right now to meet the sort of goals of our benevolent government. And what does that mean? That's why I'm taking it full circle. The real agenda is to have less cars. It's literally to get us out of cars. They want us to live in some fantasy world, some Little House on the Prairie situation where we, have a little dry goods store that we have low credit, account on, and we exchange our eggs for our chicken and everything else. And it's just, they don't like cars. They want us to all be packed into cities.
Right.
They don't want us to live the life that we live. And quite frankly, the folks who are pushing all this are living in those places anyway. The folks that advocate this stuff are already doing it. So
and that's the whole concept behind the Green New Deal, right? Which AOC is out there promoting again. We saw her out doing interviews here just recently, pushing the Green New Deal again, which the whole thing, I'm just having a conversation about that earlier today. In fact, her goal is not to have you in an electric vehicle. Her goal is to have you at home. And if you have to go somewhere, you get on a train that doesn't exist and won't exist. It's exactly what you're talking about, right?
Yeah. So let's talk about that train. They've tried to build one of those high-speed trains in California. The plan was to go from San Francisco to LA. Well, where they're at? They decided, well, let's cut it down from Bakersfield to Merced.
Yeah.
2 rural communities in the Central Valley where no one really goes unless
90 miles apart, I think, something like that. 90 miles.
They're in excess of $4 billion now, I think, in overruns and costs and projections on it. It's not happening, right? I mean,
right. Yeah. The initial project cost was 29 billion, and now the estimate for the whole thing is over 130 billion. And that's just in 15 years, right? So it's and that's what they want to do. But going back to EVs, I mean, your point about it being a luxury item for wealthy people, the average American can't. I mean, what's the price differential? Isn't it like 30 or 40% price differential?
So right now, the average cost of an EV is about $64,000. The average cost of a compact gas-powered car is about $26,000.
Yeah.
And the reason I bring up that car is because those are the kind of cars that people who are on the lower end of the economic scale, who are just starting out in their careers, coming from this country legally, college kid, high school kids who want their first car. A car is freedom. A car is mobility. Our first car was a beater, right?
Certainly
and
was.
ironically, this is going to price a lot of people out of even the used car market, because as they phase out gas cars and they get older, they come off the purchase field. They get more and more expensive as there are fewer and fewer of them, right? So it goes back to the cost thing. I call EVs right now a luxury personal lifestyle, like a luxury lifestyle item, much like those really fancy watches with, the names I can barely pronounce that cost lots and lots of money that I'll never buy and put on my wrist, because that's who's using these vehicles now. And the government is subsidizing them, which is ultimately ironic, to purchase them. Right.
Right.
So, and then of course you have the car companies, who I don't have a lot of sympathy for, quite frankly, because since about 2009, 2008, I think right after the big crash with the mortgages and the housing, they basically cried uncle and went to the government for bailouts and got them. And at that point, President Obama was in office, and he said, I'll bail you out, but from now on, I'm sitting in your boardroom. The U.S. government is now literally telling these companies what types of cars to build. And in some instances, how many, and literally telling them to basically make cars that people don't want.
Right. And I've just lately I've interviewed a couple of executives in the power business, talking about the load that the energy transition is going to place on our power grid. Let's say the EPA gets its way and we go from 6% EVs this year to 67% in 2030. I mean, can the grid handle the additional load that's going to come on just to recharge all those EVs? I mean, California's already telling people not to charge their EVs at night, which is the whole business model for Tesla, right?
Right.
I mean, are we going to be able to expand the grid using only wind and solar
So
to be able to accommodate that?
I'm going to indulge your question and say we can get there, right? Not that we should, but let's say we do. The answer is no and hell no.
Right.
DOE, which is a big Department of Energy, which is, all bullish on this. Secretary Granholm is, I don't, we track her speeches and her conversations.
Oh my God.
It's impossible to keep track of all the fabrications
that
come out of her mouth. It's shocking to me how she just makes things up in whole cloth. But there are numbers people estimated that the average range model of a 2021 gas vehicle is about 403 miles, right? So 403 miles, you run out of gas, you pull up to a station, you fill it. Maybe you go in and grab a soda or a pack of gum. You come back out. What is that? 4 or 5 minutes?
5 minutes tops.
Okay, tops. If you're in and out, it's 3, right?
Yeah.
Unless your car messes up. The average range for a model year 2021 EV was 230 miles. Guess how long, if you can find a charging station, guess how long you're going to be there? 30, 40 minutes.
At least.
So going back to your point about the grid, we know we can't, right? California is a perfect example. Concentrated EVs purchased in California, New York, and Texas, like I said, Austin. They have huge problems with reliability. The load in the Silicon Valley area is off the charts because there's a lot of vehicles there, right? And so what our United States government is doing, what this government is doing, and the bureaucrats, is 2 things at the same time: doubling the load of our electric grid by doing things like trying to ban gas stoves. We can get into that if we want, and all this EV business. And at the same time, taking offline perfectly good, reliable sources of electricity generation that have been around for a long time and still have a long shelf life. But they're decommissioning coal plants.
Right.
And why are they doing it just this week? The EPA is coming out with yet another rule. This is their 3rd or 4th or 5th time now to try to clamp down on power plants, which is basically try to put the squeeze on the remaining 18-19% of the coal generation in this country. Right. So no, the answer is no, we can't. It's not going to happen. Again, back to my point. Out of our cars altogether, forcing us to make very difficult choices about paying our power bill or taking care of college bills, taking care of groceries, taking care of prescriptions, right? These are real world issues for people who are on the poor end of the economic ladder. And
it impacts them more than anybody else in terms
100%.
of percentage of income.
Yeah, absolutely. So
it's stunning to me. And it's stunning that unfortunately it's the same people. The lower you go in income, the more you tend to vote for Democrats, right? And it's people don't understand that their votes have consequences. And you continue to elect Democrats, we're just going to go more and more down this road, and everything related to energy is just going to keep going up in price. It's really a sad example of how uninformed our media and education system has succeeded in keeping the general public. Anyway,
that's why we're doing what we're doing, and you're doing what you're doing. Quite frankly, is providing that information to folks so they can be better informed and make better choices on this EV thing. Obviously, we need to write our reps and say, "Stop the madness." Write your car company.
Right.
You own a GM car. Write Mary Barra and say, "What are you doing to my beloved brand?" Why are you destroying my brand? These car companies are now making decisions based on what the government wants them to do versus what their loyal fans want them to do, right? What their purchasers, the consumers want. And the irony is that like Ford, I'll give you a perfect example. The F-150 is the highest selling truck. The gas powered F-150 is the number one seller.
And has been for 20 something years in a row.
They've been putting so much money into this F-150 Lightning.
Yeah,
the Ford division, EV division announced they took a $3 billion hit last quarter. They also announced recently, and I don't know if a lot of people saw this, that they halted production of this vehicle. Why? Because they couldn't figure out the battery.
Yeah.
Okay. This isn't, this is not ready for prime time. This is not like, you're not going from something less safe and less and more expensive to something safer and better, right? All you're doing in essence with EVs is you're transferring a technology. Okay. You're taking a very complex motor and a very simple fuel delivery mechanism, i.e. the gas tank, and you're inverting it to make a very complex fuel delivery mechanism, i.e. the battery and all the components, and a very simple motor.
Right.
That's it. It's a transfer of technology. And it's a microcosm, which is why the Greens love this car so much, because what they want to do is transfer our whole energy system, our entire economy as a result, from a hydrocarbon-based economy to a minerals and materials-based economy.
And talk about how that's going to make us reliant. Who's that going to make us reliant on for future energy needs? All the minerals. Who controls all that right now?
The Chinese Communist government of China owns or controls 80% of this minerals-based economy.
Yeah.
If they don't make it, they don't mine it there or process it there, they have investments and investments in companies overseas that do. They're a huge investor in the Congo fields in Africa, the cobalt fields in the Congo, I should say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which, by the way, is children are mining
child
cobalt
labor
in Africa.
Yeah. By hand.
They're processing a lot of this stuff in Xinjiang, China, where they happen to be enslaving a whole sect of Uyghurs, and they're doing it all by firing up coal plants.
Yeah,
that's the irony of it all. So, and we, in the meantime, if we have a high, and the other great thing about it is, I'm going to go back. Gas-powered transportation is a way to diversify our funding, our energy, right? Electricity, you got coal, you got, renewables, fine, whatever, right? That does like the main stuff for the businesses and the plants and homes. But then you've got things like gas stoves to offset it if the power goes out, right?
Right.
You got a car to get out and evacuate in a hurricane in the South, in the Gulf, right? Yep. Imagine if we had 67% of our vehicles, electric vehicles, trying to evacuate a hurricane. Just imagine that.
Yeah. It'd be carnage on the roads.
It's totally insane.
Awful. It is.
The United States is the number one producer of oil and gas in the what world?
By far.
We have the resources here. It is a national security imperative that we not be dependent on any one country, let alone China at this stage in the world, for our entire economic system, which is in essence what we're talking about here, because energy is everything.
Yeah.
Right.
You would think these officials would have learned this lesson over the last, 14 months since Russia invaded Ukraine, and the energy crisis that created mainly for Germany, but also for some other countries in Europe that had allowed themselves to become almost completely reliant on a hostile country, a historically hostile nation, Russia, for their natural gas supplies. And because of the sanctions they wanted to put on Russia, they suddenly had to figure out a way to do without that cheap natural gas from Russia. And it's created this enormous energy crisis and now an economic disaster in Europe as a result of that. But here we have, you talk about Secretary Granholm, who is a disaster herself in that job. And all the nonsense that comes out of the government that just demonstrates they don't seem to have learned any lesson from any of that and are just essentially trying to repeat exactly the same mistakes, right? I mean, that's what it boils down to for me.
I would say that if our elected officials were trying to do what's best for the American people, the American economy, our national security, and all that, I would say you're right. They're not learning from their mistakes, but I think it's bigger than that, and it's unfortunate. This isn't about the environment. This climate change thing is, and there's even debate, like in the mainstream scientific community, about whether or not the rhetoric has gone too far.
Yeah.
Right. So this is not climate denier stuff. This is actual people who think that this is a real bad problem.
Right.
Okay. This is about power control. This is about rewarding political and financial backers. There's more going on here, right? Like you don't just assume that, whatever a politician says is actually like true, right? We all, you better not. We all know, thanks to Will Rogers, we all know this by now. This is a very sophisticated organizational, the way to organize the values and the goals of the progressive sort of socialist sort of ideology and manifesto. Okay. I'm just going to be right blunt about it. It is a way to redistribute wealth while not saying that that's what they're doing, because that never works.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
This is about taking money from us out of our pockets, our taxpayer dollars, and giving it to backers, financial, political supporters. And the other thing about the Inflation Reduction Act, for example, is just 2 weeks ago, I think the administration just announced hundreds of millions of dollars in grants to group on the ground environmental activists, right?
Right.
To be able to utilize to support this agenda. So we call it walk around money, right?
That's what we used to call it in South Texas.
So let's not kid ourselves, because going from a hydrocarbon-based energy system and hence economic system to a minerals-based energy system and economic system is not better for the environment. It's not going to do all the magical things that they say that they think it's going to do. Just getting out of our car is not going to save the world, right? All of these energy sources have benefits and trade-offs, all of them. And right now, and this is another report that the Institute put out. I'd love your viewers to get a link to it. We did a study called the Environmental Quality Index. It's based on Harvard data, but then we weighted it towards production. So the Harvard data is who does the cleanest, who produces the most oil and gas, who produces oil and gas the cleanest. And there might have been a couple of countries that actually, based on their metrics, does it cleaner, maybe 2 or 3, like a Norway or something.
Oh yeah, maybe Norway. Yeah.
When you take into account production, we blow away the world. We do it better. Nobody does it better. Was that Carly Simon or something?
Right. It was. Yeah.
Nobody does it better than we do. And so we can do it all. We can have lower emissions, which we've proven, right? The numbers are there. The United States just recently signed the quote unquote most historic climate change, game changing piece of legislation in history just last year.
Right.
Well, from 2005 until today, we've reduced our emissions more than all of the European countries who are wagging their finger at us to do better combined. And that's because of fracking.
Right.
So we can do it better. We can do it cleaner. We can do it safer. And by the way, we shouldn't take the choice away from us. Our government should not be limiting our choices. Our government should be.
That's what the whole effort to regulate gas stoves out of existence amounts to, right? I mean, there's no real reason to do that in terms of the environment.
They made up stuff.
Right.
They extrapolated from bogus studies, or like they took an example of an extreme, small, tiny little flat somewhere in Europe and said, look at all the emissions from this gas stove.
Right.
Not taking into account the vast differences in our, life. But then again, it goes back to that point, is they don't like us in big houses in suburbs with land and freedom. I don't understand it. If they don't want it, then fine. But don't tell me how to live my life, man.
Yeah. Well, but you're right. It all comes down to control. People who live in harsh circumstances and without mobility are a lot easier to control.
Let me tell you, I think that we just in church last Sunday, the visiting priest was from Nigeria, and they still have whole places in Africa where people have to go miles for their water.
Right.
They have no electricity. They would die for a coal plant. It's all relative, We have to let people have access to the things that make our lives, that reduce, that lengthen our lives, make us healthier, make us safer, all that good stuff. So I know I'm digressing a little, but
no, but you're right. I mean, there's 2.5 billion people on Earth that don't have running water or electricity, reliable electricity. And that's something that in the United States, our generation, starting with our generation, has no frame of reference for, because it was in my grandparents' generation, was really the last to live in homes, mainly in homes without plumbing and electricity. And and so in the United States, we don't have a frame of reference for that, but yet more than 2 billion people in the rest of the world, it's their daily lives. And to think that they're going to solve all that with windmills and solar panels is lunacy. I mean, it's simple energy. It's a type of insanity that I think is a result of a great deal of disinformation and active brainwashing efforts.
Sure. Much like, let me say something about the gas ban thing, the gas stove ban. When the administration floated that out, I was actually very pleasantly surprised at the response.
Yeah.
Because it was the kind of one of those tangible things, right? When you hear about all these rules and regulations that we've been harping about, for the most part, most people don't feel it immediately, because it's like that frog in the water, although I think that's not real, but slowly and steadily their electricity bills have been increasing,
right?
Especially in areas where this stuff is on hyperdrive, like California and quite frankly Texas. But when you say, I want to ban this product that you use, rely on, enjoy, that, for example, if the power went out, you could still make some mac and cheese by boiling some water or stuff like that, right? In cold climates, some people like gas stoves is the predominant source for cooking.
Yes.
You take that, you threaten to take that away, and people see it immediately. And that's why I'm sounding the alarm on this car thing, because my fear is that the auto companies will just bow and continue to do the bidding of the government, the United States government, until we get it to a tipping point where they're either going to go under because they can't afford it, no one's buying them, or they're too expensive or whatever. And then what happens is they cry back to the government for another bailout, right? So it's a cycle. I've even actually heard some of the car companies say that this proposal goes too far. Well, duh. You gave them all that wiggle room. You gave them, no opposition up until now because the money kept rolling in. And, as long as you guys pay me, as long as you keep the subsidies going, the gravy train, we'll play ball. And now they're in a position where they're like, even Debbie Dingell, who is, the congresswoman from GM,
Right.
John Dingell's wife, who was a former GM lobbyist, said, quote, everybody cares about global warming. Not sure that's true, but I'm hearing from too many people in this country, I mean, strong Democrats, that they can't afford an electric vehicle. So it's working. That's why I'm driving. That's why, pardon the pun, but I'm driving this message. People need to know they're coming for your car.
Yep. Just like they're coming for the stove,
They're coming.
Yeah.
It may not seem like it now. You may not see too many of these in your communities, but they're coming for it. And the irony is, again, we talked about the cost differential. Well, a lot of the SUVs on the market for for gas-powered SUVs on the market are super expensive now, right? Well, the companies are putting a surcharge, kind of a hidden surcharge on these cars to offset their losses in EV land. So the cost of new cars on the gas-powered side are going up.
Right.
I mentioned earlier, the cost of used cars are going up. So the cost of all of this is going up. And again, the folks who like these policies aren't impacted in the least because chances are they can afford it.
Oh, yeah. No, we have, it goes back to my point that I make too much probably, we have the very worst possible class of people in our societies making these decisions for us because they're not impacted. I mean, Jennifer Granholm is not impacted by any of this.
Mm-hmm.
She's going to get to keep her gas stove, which, by the way, she produced a video clip of herself cooking on her own gas stove in her own home.
Can I add to that?
Yeah,
Stacy Abrams,
yes,
who ran for governor, she joined an environmental group. Again, going back to the point that this is about the organizational arm of the Democratic Party that advocates fiercely for banning gas stoves. In her campaign commercials when she was running for governor, her whole theme was sitting around the house cooking for her family on her big, beautiful gas stove.
Her 8-burner stove, right? Yeah.
So I want her to issue a press release today saying, I'm getting rid of my gas stove. You know who I want? What I want President Biden to do? I want him to announce today that he's selling his Corvette or he's donating his Corvette to charity.
Sure.
Practice what you preach, pal. Live your values, right?
Right. But none of that's going to happen because these folks know they're exempt from it. They're wealthy. A higher electricity bill doesn't impact them in any way.
Exactly.
They probably have some foundation they can, funnel all the bills to in any event. And it's just, you have all these people who suffer none of the impacts making the policies. And that's just always a recipe for disaster, not just in energy, but any walk of life. It just is. Yeah, it's crazy. Hey, man, we are.
Okay, go
I was
going to say but I agree. But in energy, it is magnified because it impacts everything.
Yes.
Energy is everything. It's the input cost in our lives, right? And when you increase the cost of energy, you make everything more expensive. And when you make it less reliable, you actually risk, people's lives are at risk.
Yes, because you can't have food without energy.
Get the government out of my energy. You can't get food to the
supermarket. Right.
Let's get the government out of our energy business. Just get out.
Exactly. Man, it's always a pleasure talking with you. We're out of time. Let's do this again much more quickly than we cycled back this time. And I apologize.
All right, sounds good.
So much time went by.
No
worries. Yeah, man. Thanks a lot.
Yep. Pleasure.
All right. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thanks to the Sandstone Group for hosting the show and our extraordinary producer, Eric Perel. I'm David Blackmon, signing off for now.